What is up, everyone? It's David. Welcome back to Gem and MTG, where we talk about all things related to graded Magic the Gathering cards. No introduction today, no fancy stuff. We are going to get right into the data. This is the Graded Multiplier Analysis Part 2. So what we're going to be doing here is going through additions to the data set that I have done over the last few weeks. If you have not checked out Part 1 of this video, please pause the video, go check that out, or none of this is going to make sense. But what we're doing here is adding more and more records to the database of graded card sales that have been placed in the open market. And what I've done is synthesize all that data into an easy to digest format so we can evaluate graded sales and see if they fall in a certain pattern for that grade. So without any further ado, let's take a look at just a refresher here. The first thing to go over here is the multiple calculation. So what we do is take a near mint price average from different online retailers, take an average of that price, and then divide the sale price of the graded card by that near mint price with an adjustment made for the grading fee. Now, what that means is that if you had a card that sold for $150 and that card originally was $80 for a near mint average, add 35 for the grading fee, 150 divided by 115 is a 30% premium. You pay a 30% premium for that card. Okay, that is the multiple calculation example. Now, let's get to the data. So, like I said, there has been a lot of data added to this data set. This is the original one that we're looking at now. You can see the spread from the PSA 8 to the PSA 10 and everything in between from Beckett and CGC. This is the distribution curve that we had in our last video. Now, I'm going to flip to the updated data set that includes all of the additional records that were added right now. Blammo, look at that. I removed the data point, the data values, because we already went over that, and you can kind of see that the data is very similar, but you have more and more points within those ranges, which is exactly what we wanted to see if we are proving the thesis that these grades fall in a certain pattern. Now, you can see for particularly the mint and gem mint, that's what I'm primarily focused on, what most people are focused on, what most people care about. Mint, gem mint, that's what we're here for. We want those minty cards. Okay, so taking a look at the BGS 9 and the PSA 9, you can see on here on the scatter plot, those ranges from 1 to 2 have become much more concentrated. Same thing with the 9/5s. You can see, although the spread, there's been more points along the spread, the concentration of data points in that 2 to 4 range has increased, proving our thesis. But you know that the scatter plot is not the best way to look at this information. What we want to do is look at the box and whisker. So let's go ahead and flip over to that now. All right, here we are. So this was the original box and whisker graph. You can see, like I talked about in the last video, the concentration of grades for PSA has a lot more outliers outside of the normal range than BGS does. There are outliers, but there are more outliers and more extreme examples for PSA. And that has proven true with the additional data that has been added to this data set. So I'm going to flip to the updated set right now. So here we go. You can see it looks very similar, but what you have is more and more concentration of data points in those expected ranges. The expected ranges didn't change all that much, which is good. It shows that our original thesis was pretty accurate for the multiple range for these grades, but what you can see is that there are a lot more data points clustered in there, proving that the ranges that we had originally estimated were pretty close. There was a little bit of shifting around within these clusters, but for the most part, they are about what we thought they were. So let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do now is break it down by grade by individual grade for the PSA 9, BGS 9, the BGS 9.5, and the PSA 10. Those are the ones that we all want, and that's what we're going to focus on. So I'm going to switch it up here, and we're going to take a look at the box and whisker for those particular grades, starting off here with the PSA 9. So you can see here, this is an individual graph for just the PSA 9, so it's very easy to follow, very easy to digest. You can see here the expected value for a PSA 9 starts in the range of 1, which means you're basically paying the near mint price for the card, and it goes all the way up to about 1.75 with outliers that reach just over 2, and in the case of an extreme example, over 3. But you can see that the data is clustered here in the 1 to 2 range, leaning toward 1.25 to 1.75, which is what you would expect to pay for a PSA 9 card. You want to have about a 25 to 75% premium depending on the card, depending on the rarity within the population, depending on the popularity of the card, depending on the age of the card, depending on a number of factors, but that is the expected range. Let's take a look at the BGS 9. You see here a tighter cluster. Like I mentioned before, the PSA seems to have, based on the data that is available here that I have seen, the PSA tends to have a wider range of expected values. Now, the BGS 9, a little more tightly clustered around 0.8 to 1.25. So the premium is not normally as high as a PSA 9. But you still do have plenty of examples that fall in that 1.5 to 1.5 and even closer to 2 range. So it does happen, it's just not as common. So let's take a look now, shifting gears to the BGS 9.5, the Gem Mint BGS 9.5 gold label. Here you can see that the cluster has shifted up from the range of 1.75 all the way over to 3. With most of the data concentrated in that 2 to 3x range. That means that for a BGS 9.5, the expected price for that card is going to be roughly 2 to 3 times the near mint price of the card with the adjustment for the grading fee. You can see here the data is very heavily clustered. It's very grouped close together with minimal outliers that fall into the 4, 5, 6 range. Does it happen? It does. Is it common? It's not. So what you want to look for when you are purchasing or selling a BGS 9.5 is something in the range of 1.75 to 3 times the near mint price of that card. Anything more than that, and you're in the anomaly range where maybe it's justified, maybe it's a low population card, maybe it's an extremely popular card, whatever the case may be, it may be justified, but you need to make that decision for yourself. Now, let's switch gears here to the PSA 10. So the PSA 10, like I mentioned before, there's a lot more volatility, and the expected premium is a step higher than the BGS 9.5. You can see that the box here starts at 2, works its way all the way up to 4, over 4, 5. And that is not uncommon. It is not uncommon for a PSA 10 to sell for 4 to 5 times the near mint price of that card. Unlike the BGS 9.5, where most of the data is clustered in the 2 to 3x range, it's very normal for a PSA 10 to sell for 3, 4, even 5 times the price of that card. So it's dependent on different factors. There's like I mentioned before, there's population, there's overall rarity of the card, there's playability of the card, popularity of the card, all kinds of things that factor into it, and the absolute price of the card. It's a lot easier to overpay for a card that does not cost as much as a card that already has a high dollar value for just the raw price of the card. There's a much different effect on your wallet paying 5 times the price of a card that costs $10 than 5 times the price of a card that costs $1,000. Absolute dollars matter, and you can see that that affects the data in the PSA 10, for example, very much so. So that covers all of those 4 subgrades that I wanted to highlight in this video. It was very important for me that we look at these on a little more granular level, because what we're going to do here is shift gears from just analyzing the data as a whole to analyzing independent sales that are happening in the market on a regular basis. That was the goal of this project from the beginning, and that's what I hope to do using this data set now that it is available. So let's go ahead and start that off here with taking a look at some examples of card sales that have happened in the market that maybe you saw. Maybe you've seen these cards for sale, or maybe you saw when these sales occurred. But I guarantee you, this first one, you're going to recognize it. Let's hop into the 1993 Alpha Black Lotus PSA 10 Gem Mint. That sold for $511,000 in January of 2021. Now, using our calculation example, if the near mint average price for the Black Lotus from Alpha is around $150,000, which is a rounded number, it's not easy to find an ungraded near mint Alpha Black Lotus, but I would expect the price of the card to be somewhere around $125,000 to $150,000. That's what it has been historically recently, and if one came up for sale, that is what I would expect it to sell for. Now, the price that it sold for, $511,000, was that out of the norm? Well, let's take a look at our calculation. $511,000 divided by 150,000 was a 3.5x multiple. For a PSA 10, not out of the norm at all. You probably thought this was going to be one of those examples of a 5, 6, 7, 10x multiple. No, not at all. This one fell exactly in the range that we would have expected for a PSA 10. Now, let's take a look at another example. The Sword of Light and Shadow Kaladesh Invention Foil PSA 10. This card sold for $1,200. Crazy. Based on a near mint average of $200, that is almost a 6x multiple. That is a lot. That's why I was saying that the absolute price of the card is a factor. It's a lot easier to overpay for a card if the absolute dollars are less. It would have been a lot harder to digest a 6x multiple on an Alpha Black Lotus. That would have been a $700,000 card instead of a $500,000 card. So the absolute dollars do matter, and I think this is a good example of a couple things. One, a 6x multiple happening on a card, and two, a 6x multiple happening on a card that is new, a card that's not reserve list, a card that's not particularly rare. One of the things that I preach on this channel is that grading cards, investing in cards, does not have to be limited to iconic reserve list staples. I know that that's, what a lot of people like, and I do too. Don't get me wrong. I have a whole reserve list collection and stuff. I love reserve list too, but there's a lot of beautiful Magic cards that hold a special place for people. And this is an example of someone out there graded their Sword of Light and Shadow from Kaladesh Inventions, and they 6x their money and sold it for $1,200. I think that's awesome. I think it's great to see stuff like this. I hope that the buyer was happy with the card that they got. It's an amazing card, a PSA 10 Kaladesh Invention. And it's just a great example of fetching a high multiple on a card that's not necessarily something from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, Legends, anything like that. It's a Kaladesh Invention, and it sold for 6x multiple. Incredible. Another one to look at, a CGC card. CGC, newer kid on the block, not the most popular company to use. I personally don't have any CGC graded cards, but you know what? That's just my personal taste. That doesn't mean it's not for you or not for someone else, as you can see here. This Chrome Mox from Mirrodin, which I did highlight in a video. I do have a graded Chrome Mox Mirrodin. It's a BGS, it's a 9, but I thought this was a great example of a CGC 9.5 that fetched a really nice premium, and also a newer card, not necessarily a super expensive reserve list staple like a Black Lotus. This is a Chrome Mox from Mirrodin foil, and it sold for $800. A near mint average estimated around $300. These are not easy to find. Trust me, I have looked. They're not easy to find, but if you wanted a near mint, absolutely nice minty raw foil chrome mox Mirrodin, you'd be paying around $300. So for an $800 sale, that is a 2.5x multiple, which is a normal multiple for a BGS 9.5. Here's a CGC that fetched an equal premium to its counterpart, the BGS 9.5. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's also an example of a card that can grade as high as a low PSA 10, and it's not a PSA graded card. It's a CGC 9.5 that sold for 2.5x. I think it's great. So that's it for today. I just wanted to take some time, go through the data a little bit more in depth on a granular level for the individual grades, as well as provide some real world examples of cards that sold in the market recently and use them as an example to show the grading multiplier at work, both in extreme cases of a PSA 10 that sold for a 6x multiple in the case of the Sword of Light and Shadow Kaladesh Invention, as well as a CGC 9.5 Chrome Mox that sold for a 2.5x multiple, exactly what we would expect. And the ultimate sale of all time, the most expensive graded Magic card ever sold, the PSA 10 Black Lotus from Alpha, did not fetch a crazy premium. It is exactly the premium that we would have expected based on our analysis of the PSA 10 market. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If this type of data and this type of analysis interests you, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe to this channel. My name is David. I'm going to be talking about graded cards all the time here on Gem Mint MTG, and I would really appreciate your subscription. I'm going to be going over graded sales in the marketplace on a regular basis. Now that we have this format, this data, these reference points to go off of for the graded sales, all of this backup, all of this data is the backbone of what we will use to evaluate sales in the graded marketplace on a regular basis. I hope to see you there. I thank you for watching this video. Until next time, thanks. Have a great one.